What's up everyone, welcome back here at the Neon Pavilion. My name is Niklas and we are ready for yet another talk about the Eurovision Song Contest. Last night we had the first semi-final live from Liverpool and I am ready to talk all about it. We're going to be reacting to what I thought about the show itself. We're also going to be talking about the non-qualifiers and of course the qualifiers. Was it the right ones? Was it the wrong ones? We will take a look at it. At least we'll take a look at my opinion. We can't take a look at everyone's opinion, but we're going to be taking a look at my opinion today. Just like I did with the video where I talked about the rehearsal clips, I am trying out something new and doing this on a live stream. So if you have some questions or if you have something you want me to touch on, let me know in the live chat and I will possibly do it in the show here. At least if you are watching live. If you aren't, then that will be a little bit difficult. But let's actually get into it. The Eurovision 2023 is it has officially begun. We've had the first semi-final now, and I gotta say right off the bat, I think this is a fantastic production this year. The BBC have really showed that they can put on a fantastic show. You know, a lot has happened in the world of Eurovision since they hosted last time back in 1998. It's just a lot bigger now, and there are so many things you have to get right. The show has become a lot more tight since the early days of the Eurovision, and there's just a lot of things to do, but I think personally they did a really great job. I think first of all, they found some great hosts. They've really found some people who can do it great, and I think that was always going to be that one thing that we were going to be talking about, because you know, you wanted it to be both Ukrainian and you wanted it to be the United Kingdom show. So because of that, they needed some hosts who could do both, and I think I was one of the people at least who, you know, in the beginning, I felt like, why didn't they have 2 Ukrainian hosts and 2 British hosts? You know, we have Graham Northern, I cannot say his name today for some reason, but we have Graham joining in the final. So we'll have 3 hosts from the United Kingdom and we'll have 1 Ukrainian host. I don't know if I'm a huge fan of that constellation still, but I think the way that they actually done it in the end, where we have Alicia Dixon mainly as a green room host, I think is good. I was a little worried that they would just throw Julia Sanina in there and just say, you're gonna do all the green room stuff, and then we have the 2 British hosts doing all the banter and all that. They didn't do that. They've managed to do a script where both Hannah and Julia can feel comfortable interacting with each other. It doesn't feel like it doesn't fit their styles. It doesn't feel like, you know, that they have no chemistry between each other. They really do seem like they work well together, and I think it's good that they have put these 2 as like the main hosts. At least it was that in the first semifinal. I don't know if they're gonna change that up for the second semifinal, of course, but it does look like that this is the constellation that we're going to use. Also because Hannah, she speaks French, so she does the French bits of it. It makes a lot of sense from that perspective, I feel like, and I think they work well together. The green room bits, I mean, they're there and they have to be there. We have to have the little interviews, and I think, you know, what they did, for example, with the little dances where they had, I think it was Malta, it was Israel, and it was Finland doing some of their dance bits and, you know, teaching the other contestants. I like doing that because sometimes, you know, you have those green room interviews that can get a little awkward because the artists aren't fluent in English. So because of that, it sometimes gets a little awkward, or you need to have a translator in there, and that doesn't always really work too well. So I think doing it more and more scripted, as they are starting to do with these green room bits, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm just gonna take some water here, because, yeah. Stay hydrated, kids. It's great host, like I said. I'm glad Julia is in there as one of like the main host, or whatever you want to call it. But the tone of the show and everything like around the show, it feels very British. And I don't think that's necessarily a complaint. I think it honestly does make a lot of sense because it is a British production. And I think Every time we go to a new country in Eurovision, I always say, let's try to get as much of the country's identity in there, because it's one of those things that's very unique with the Eurovision that you don't really get with any other shows, is that countries are really able to put their own unique spin on things. They're really able to get their own culture in there. And I think the UK has done that. I think the issue for me is just, I'm just not that big of a fan of it. I'm not someone who has grown up with a lot of British TV shows. I haven't grown up with a lot of British humor or whatever. So I'm just not a huge fan of this, I think. I think some of it just gets a little too loud, and it relies a little bit too much on comedy. And I think the hosts at least pull it off well. But I think something like, for example, Alicia's little rap there, which was, you know, done to fill some time because you have to get all these stage elements in there. I would honestly have preferred just a normal green room interview. I know what I just said, right? But I think I would have still preferred a normal green room interview to that. Because first of all, it felt very, very random. I don't know if it really felt out of place. I guess it didn't. It's a music competition, so I guess that makes sense. But it felt very random. And you just sit back with that feeling like, what? It's a little bit the same feeling that I had with, I forget the hosts, the names of the host last year in Turin, but when they did that little green screen bit in the final, that felt very psychedelic and very like, who came up with that and how drunk were they when they came up with that? This feels a little bit like the same thing. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it. I put down that it's loud, and I think that's the best way that I can explain it. It's a very loud culture, so everything comes off very shouty and very like quick, and we have to get all these jokes in there, and we have to get all these little references in there. And that's another thing. I don't know, I feel like they really want to pack the show this year with as many guest appearances as they possibly can. And it's kind of been a thing that we've seen for the past couple of years, where so much of the Eurovision show has to be about the history of the Eurovision. And I don't necessarily think that's the right way to go about it. I think when we first started seeing these elements, I thought it was fun. You know, you get to introduce new viewers to some of the history of the Eurovision Song Contest. That's great. But nowadays, it seems like we're just doing the same thing over and over again. We have to have all these like look backs every single time. They're fine. There's no reason to really complain about them. But I just think it gets a little bit too much this year, especially because they want to cram as many cameos in there as they possibly can. You know, we have that whole thing where it's like, okay, now so we get the Fizz in there. That was one of the things we had. We had the Fizz in there doing a little bit in the green room that didn't really make too much sense. Then, you know, Dustin the Turkey comes out of nowhere. And I love that we had Dustin the Turkey back. Don't get me wrong. I thought that was fun to have him in there. But was it necessary? I don't really know if it was. And I think for the average viewer in most of Europe who do not know who Dustin the Turkey is, who aren't old enough to remember his performance there, or have simply just chosen to forget it. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it was really that necessary to have that many cameos. And, you know, as fun as I think the Q or not Q thing that Monselmelöv and Filomena did, yeah, it's fun, it's fine, it's great fan service. I mentioned that in the other video as well, fan service. We have a lot of that. I think it is a little bit too much. You know, especially because then you have someone like Filomena who, yes, if you watched the show in 2018 in Lisbon, she is a queen. She was iconic. She was a fantastic host who was really the standout of the hosting quartet back in 2018. Definitely. But the average viewer just tuning in, watching Eurovision, maybe for the first time, they won't know who she is. And I know they introduce her in the beginning of the bit, but it feels random. It feels out of place. And it gives you that feeling of, why her? Not because she's bad, but just because it feels like a very random choice. So, I don't know, maybe there's a little bit too much fan service this year. I hope whoever wins and hosts next year will just tone that down a little bit and focus maybe a little bit more on local elements. Because sure, we have those as well, and we have the whole thing, you know, uniting United Kingdom and the UK, no, the United Kingdom and Ukraine together. That's what I wanted to say. The Rebecca Ferguson and Alicia interval act, I don't know. I think it tells that story that it's supposed to tell. I think visually it was great. I forgot to pull up a clip of it because I guess I didn't care too much for it. That sounds really bad because it's not that I don't care for it. It's not that I don't think it's bad because it wasn't. But I think, you know, some way or another, they were gonna have to tell this story of the war. And, you know, we always say Eurovision tries to be as non-political as possible. I think this is definitely the closest we've gotten to, like, an actual political interval act. Some people may really disagree with me there and say that, you know, war and all these things aren't political. I get that. But I think it was very much out there. You know, they aren't trying to put a damper on it, I guess is the best way to say. They aren't trying to put a damper on, you know, we are here in the United Kingdom this year because Ukraine can't host, because there's a war going on, and there's still a war going on. And, you know, it was always going to be difficult. It was always going to be difficult to get that balance between not being too much out there, you know, war, everything is bad, all these things. I think they are balancing it well, but I think I'm just always critical of interval acts. I think sometimes it just feels like filler, and this one, it's fine, but I wasn't incredibly impressed with it. And I think especially having only 15 songs in the semifinal this year meant that we had a lot of room for interval acts, and maybe we had a little bit too much filler space this year. I mean, I'm not a RØDE fan. I have nothing against her. She's done some great songs, but it didn't feel like it needed to be there. You gotta cut out that interval act, have the show 5 minutes shorter, and I think it would have all just felt a little bit better and a little bit more like we didn't just have to buy a bunch of time. I don't know, personal opinion. People who love RØDE, I'm sure were so happy to see her on that stage. I don't know, it didn't do much for me at all. And something that didn't really do it for me either, not that it was necessarily bad, but just because it was just kind of there. That's the Postcards this year. It was always going to be difficult. I feel like I've talked about it in a video. I forget if I have or not, but it was always going to be difficult to get some good Postcards this year because you want to show the United Kingdom, you want to show Ukraine, but then you also wanted to show the artist in their home country because, you know, you want to do this whole united thing where you show, and I like the idea of it. It's clever that it's, you know, you have, for example, a library. Well, we have libraries all over the world. We have that in the country of the artist, we have that in Ukraine, and we have it in the United Kingdom. I get what they want to do there, but it has to go so quick that it's just, I don't know, it's definitely better than what we've had in recent years. Let me say it like that. It's definitely a lot better than what we had in Rotterdam, which I thought was one of the worst we've had in recent years. I feel like, you know, that year it would have been better to just do, let's see the Netherlands, instead of doing that thing that just felt very, very flat and very boring. So I wasn't a fan of that. And then, of course, last year with the projections, great idea, horrible execution. So, you know, to actually have something that feels well produced this year, that's nice. But I don't know. I don't know if it's really, like, if it's something that I think is super amazing and, you know, best Postcards ever. Definitely not. They're fine. They were there. It's all good. Should we talk about the songs? How about that? But before we get into that, I do have one thing I want to mention. I forgot that. That's about the production itself, because I feel like, you know, the production has been great. I think it's been a great production. I think what the BBC are doing so far is great. There are a few errors here and there. I still don't know what those noises in the background during one of the green room segments were. I guess we'll never figure out. There are a few times where you see a Steadicam operator in shot. It's difficult to get around that, and it is such a large-scale event, so many things going on, that you're bound to have mistakes. And, you know, they can still work things out and still get a great show for the grand final that may sort some of these things out. But there's just one thing I quickly want to point out, because I didn't enjoy that too much. And that's actually when you have, because I've talked a lot about the LEDs in the background. Some might say I'm a little obsessed with talking about that, but I'm someone who gets very much into the production, way more than I get into the music. And, you know, having those lights, you know, you can turn the LEDs around, you can have the lights, that's fine. But the sides are a different story. The sides are LED as well, but you can't turn those around. And it gives us something like, I wanted to pull up this picture, and this is just, I've just used Moldova as an example because that's like the mental note I made in my head where it's like, Moldova did this, so I have to remember to talk about this in the video. What we're seeing over here, you know, it just feels very boxed off. You get that black box there where you have the lights, and then you have the LEDs on the side. And this you also have like one LED on each side that's light up. I don't know. I don't think this looks very good at all. I think the way that I would have gone about it, and I think this is not necessarily the BBC's fault, because I think the best way to have solved this would be that the delegation themselves would have actually worked with this. I think had I been a delegation who was working with this, I would have gone for, instead of having the LEDs on the side light up when you are using the light panels instead of the LEDs, I would simply just have that turned off. I would simply just have that as being black, because you get these very, very harsh corners, very harsh cutoffs, and I'm just not a huge fan of that. I don't think it looks too good. I think it's very difficult to explain. I should have tried to write down a little bit. I guess what I'm just trying to say is I don't think it looks good. I think it looks harsh. I think it looks wrong. It looks like something is wrong, you know, the same way that the kinetic sun just standing there, not being able to move last year looked like there was something wrong, which there was, so that made a lot of sense. But I feel like it's a little bit of the same here when you have those wide shots where you can see LEDs on the side panels, but the whole background is lights. It feels like there's something wrong. That's just what I wanted to say. Now let's get into the songs. Let's actually talk about them. We have, of course, 10 songs qualified for the grand final. These are the 10 that are going through. It is Croatia, Moldova, Switzerland, Finland, Czechia, Israel, Portugal, Sweden, Serbia, and Norway. I think most people will agree with me here when I say that there weren't too many surprises in here. I had a feeling if Croatia were to go through, they would 100% mention them as the first one, because that's just one of those things that's very much been talked about. And you gotta remember, producers, they are definitely looking at trends online. They're definitely looking at how can we, you know, take people's expectations and do something with them. And everyone was basically like, Croatia, they're not gonna do it. They're not gonna do a Moldova like last year. It's bad. No one likes it. They're not gonna qualify. Of course, the producers knew that. They've looked at the betting odds as well and thought, you know, we can see that Croatia is qualifying. Of course, we're gonna put them as the very first to bring shockwaves in the arena and to the audience. I love stuff like that. I love when production gets fun like that. And there was never a doubt in my mind that if Croatia were to go through, they would be the first one to be announced. And I'm also not too surprised that Croatia is actually going through. I think this is a lot more fun than what people make it out to be. I talked about in my video where I talked about the rehearsals as well, that I do like this, but I also come from a country where dark satire like this is definitely something that we're very used to, and I think that may just be the case. I think that people aren't used to this sort of style, and because of that, some people just see it as just noise. People see it as just weird old men being kind of creepy and dressing up, but I don't see it like that, because I think this is so obvious that it's satire. It's so obvious that they're poking fun at world leaders. They're poking fun at these, you know, Soviet leaders, ex-Soviet leaders who want to take over the world or whatever. So obviously they have to do it over the top, and they're a band who are known for being over the top. It's a style and it's a choice that you can make. Some people will not like that kind of satire style, and that's fine. But to say that there's something creepy about it, or there's something wrong about it, or they should be disqualified, I don't think that's the case. People will use the argument that this song is too political, but in my opinion, it's just as political as something like Switzerland, which came right after them. You know, singing about someone being war hungry and someone singing about don't wanting to go to war. Like, those are the same thing. If you want to disqualify one of them, you have to disqualify all of them. And you can't do that. It's the exact same thing as, like, in was it 1990 or 1991? See, this is really bad. It was in 89 that the Berlin Wall fell, right? This shows my age very much. I do very much apologize. But I think it was in 1990, where there were so many songs about, you know, uniting Europe. And we had songs about Brandenburger Tor, all these kinds of things. It was always going to be the same deal this year. There were always going to be war songs. And if you have to disqualify one, suddenly you have to disqualify a lot of them. And you also just, if you were to do that, you would also have to pull out something like, for example, the interval act that we saw yesterday. Because there was also, you know, elements of war in there. And you cannot take all these things out. I think it's great that Croatia qualified. I think they will be a fun addition, especially because I feel like some of the other fun songs we have, they may not actually go through to the final. So to actually have a slice of fun in there, that's great. We're hoping for more fun songs, of course. But I do want to, before we really get into the qualifiers and talk about them, we lost Malta, and I'm very sad about that, because I don't know when I became such like a hype train for Malta, but I sort of did. I think their performance was actually great. I loved them. I thought full of energy. It was elevated, like I said. I think it was in my previous video also. I talked about that. It felt like it was an elevated performance from what they had in the national final. And that was a great way of going about it. They had so much energy. They had so much fun on stage. And this really popped off there. This is, in my opinion at least, one of the best performances we had last night. And I think it was just sandwiched in between some fan favorites. And that was the reason it didn't go through. Because I feel like had this been in semifinal 2 maybe, or had this been somewhere else where it wasn't surrounded by so many fan favorites, maybe it would have gone through. I'm very sad to see this go, at least, because I really thought this was a standout performance of last night. I thought it could actually do something. But then again, I always have these performances, and it's mainly some of the fun ones, actually, that I look at in the semifinals and think, wow, this is great. This really stands out. I think Brooke from Ireland last year is another great example of someone that I think, this is polished, this is fun, it's great. No doubt it's going to qualify, and then it doesn't qualify, and I sit there back thinking, do I just not know what the rest of Europe wants? And I guess that's just the case. The Netherlands didn't go through either. This was, like I said, one of my favorite songs, but I think we all knew in the end that it was going to struggle to qualify. It didn't have that moment, I feel like, that I was hoping for it to have. I was definitely just hoping for a little more from them. I think the vocals weren't too great. I didn't like his falsetto in the first chorus. I didn't enjoy that at all. They wanted to create this atmosphere, and I do think to some extent they did, but they didn't interact enough with each other. I feel like it was one of those feelings where you have two singers that are just kind of singing more to the camera, more to the audience, that they're singing to each other. And when you're doing a song like this that feels very personal and that has that feeling, that very intimate feeling, you just have to have a little bit more chemistry. And I guess they just didn't have that. I feel like in the pre-parties, they've been better at looking at each other. The vocals haven't been there, but they've at least been better at interacting with each other. And I feel like in this performance, they just didn't interact enough. And I think it was also just forgotten in a sea of other songs. Personally, I would have 100% swapped this out for Switzerland. They are in a little bit of the same style, but I think this is still the better song compared to Switzerland. But maybe it was just not the better performance. And finally, I also just want to give a little shout out to Azerbaijan. I think it was a great song. I didn't expect this to be one of those where I would say this is actually a really great song, but it was. For some reason, in like the past couple of days, watching the rehearsals, getting into this, actually watching the performance yesterday, I suddenly loved it. I suddenly loved the Azerbaijani song, cheered for them, wanting them to go through. I knew there was never going to be a chance that they were going to go through, but I was just, for whatever reason, I was just rooting for them, because I think, first of all, it's nice to see Azerbaijan bring something that's completely different to what they normally send. But I also just think that this was in a style of its own. It was unique, and it's different than any of the other songs we have in the lineup this year. I think this song will have a life on its own for the people who enjoy it, for the people who are fans of this. And I do hope that these two brothers will be able to, and I think they have, you know, found a new audience and found some fans all over Europe. I would definitely be interested in seeing what they can bring in the future, because I think this is very different. The worst thing here, I feel like the worst outcome of all this is the fact that now that they didn't qualify, the Azerbaijani broadcaster will most likely look at this and think, well, we tried something different, it didn't work, let's go back to the same sort of pop songs we always sent. And I think that's such a waste, because these guys got a chance to perform something that felt very true to them and that felt different than anything else we had in Eurovision this year. They got to perform that on a huge stage. They got to get out there and show their talent. It's difficult enough for someone from a country like Azerbaijan to actually get out there and to be noticed, because it is a country that a lot of people don't know, and it's a music scene that's definitely not known in the rest of the world. So they got their chance, and they maybe wouldn't have gotten that otherwise. And I would really love for the Azerbaijani broadcaster to do more of this, to try to focus more on bringing these artists out there who bring something different, because I think maybe it won't be a success right from the beginning, but maybe at some point they will actually find someone who can take them to the final, who can take them in top 5 and maybe possibly even win, because it takes a lot to win Eurovision. And sometimes it isn't enough to have something that's really polished. They managed to do it in 2011, but they haven't managed to get to that level that they had in the 2010s, in the early 2010s, in the past couple of years. So I hope they don't stop experimenting. I guess that's my main point of it. I hope that they don't stop experimenting, because I think having Azerbaijan experiment, I think that's great. And I think, you know, with that being said, maybe they should try next year, instead of just really trying to be polished, maybe try to really go to their roots. Do something like Always from 2009, or do something like Every Way That I Can, something that has those like Turkish, Middle Eastern vibes in it. And I think a lot of people would actually appreciate that, and they would appreciate it a lot more than just, you know, what we in the fandom like to call Melfest rejects. So I'm trying to be positive and hoping that they are actually going to go down a different route next year, Azerbaijan. Let's just go back to the qualifiers here once more. Like I said, I think Croatia was probably the biggest surprise for many. Switzerland, in my opinion, that was the biggest surprise for me. I already kind of touched upon it. I think the performance did move some people, and I think it was staged well, and he sings well. He has a fantastic voice, so no doubt that that could help him through. But I always felt like Switzerland was such a jury song, you know, and because we didn't have the juries in the semifinal this year, I didn't expect this one to be able to go through. But they managed, and good for them. It's not among my favorites, and I think other people have said this as well, but I think that the Switzerland song is just, I think it's a little bit tone deaf, because I don't like that the message of it is, oh, boo-hoo, I don't want to go to war. I feel like there are so many other things they could have done. I talked to my girlfriend about it when we watched the show, and something that like popped up in my head was like, I think one of the ways that they could have salvaged this song was if he had like a bridge towards the end, or maybe the final chorus, where he goes out and say, I don't want to fight, I don't want to play with real guns, but I'll do it to save who I love, or whatever. I think that would have taken it to a different level, because it would have been that feeling of course no one wants to go to war. Of course it's sad that this is where we are, and that, you know, blood and gore is back in Europe. I get that that's the message they want, but I think when the message is just, I don't want to do it, I don't think this is fun, it's not water guns, this is real, and I don't want to be part of it. It just feels like it's just someone complaining about like, oh no, I hope that the war doesn't spread to Switzerland because I don't want to do it. There were better ways to execute that, I feel like, and that didn't work for me. I was also a little bit surprised with Portugal, actually. Not that I think it's a bad song, it's not my style, and I think that's fair to say. Portugal is not my style, but I did think that it was maybe a little bit too Portuguese to actually get there into the final. But I do think, like, she has a lot of energy, and she has a lot of stage presence, and I think that's potentially the reason that it got through, was because, you know, you have to connect with the audience to get through in a televoting only semi. And I do think that she connected very well with the audience. And it was also, you know, I think to some extent it was actually to her advantage that the performance was a little bit more toned down, that there wasn't a lot going on, because it means that you can focus on her vocals, and her stage presence. And getting those things right, I think, was the reason for success. Of course, we don't know if Portugal was the 10th qualifier. We won't know until after the final, but yeah, I don't know. I didn't have that down on my card. But then again, like looking at some of the non-qualifiers, again, I would have liked to have Malta in there instead of one of those, but it is what it is in the Netherlands as well. But other than that, I think Moldova, Finland, Czechia, Israel, Sweden, Serbia, Norway, these were always ones that were gonna qualify. I think these were also some of the more slick ones, definitely some of the ones that felt very polished. Of course, we have the whole Finland versus Sweden going on. I'm still, I don't know. I forget what I said in the other video, because I think I'm kind of team neither, just because I'm not a fan of any of them. I don't listen to any of the songs. I think musically, I prefer Tattoo, but staging wise, I prefer Cha Cha Cha, because it's just so out there. And I think especially at the beginning, where he like punches the wood bits from the box and he looks through that, they managed to do that very well. It feels very slick. Even if one of them, it felt like, you know, the second one that he has to punch through, it didn't work on the first time, but he just punches it again, and it didn't feel like it was, you know, a mistake or something went wrong. It didn't throw him out of it, which shows a lot of professionalism in my opinion. I still think Tattoo looks great, but I think, just like other people have said, the box just looks a little weird now that it's so small. And maybe it's because we have seen it bigger. We have seen the LED panel bigger, so we know what could have been there. I don't know why they didn't just make it wider and narrower instead of having it like be a perfect square, especially because they have such a wide picture. You know, it's such a wide picture that you get all this blank space at both ends of it that I don't think is necessary. If they've just stretched the LED out, done it longer and narrower, and really done it there with the camera angles, I think it could have done something different. But I mean, it's still a contender to win. Everyone's saying that, you know, the smaller box has ruined the performance. Absolutely not. It's still tied with the camera angles. It's still, you know, a very different performance. It's something that stands out, and it's something that people will remember. I don't think, in my opinion at least, I don't think it stands out as much as Karia does. I think that's a more standout performance. But I don't know. Maybe it's just because we've talked so much about the Swedish performance. We've talked so much about Tattoo for the past couple of years that maybe that's just the reason. For the past couple of years, sorry. This felt like a long time. For the past couple of months, we've talked so much about Loreen. Would it be the same staging, all this? We've talked about it. We've seen, you know, the clip from Melody Festival on Twitter so many times, a lot of us, I feel like. So maybe we just feel like we've seen it too much, and maybe that's why it doesn't have the same impact. I don't know. Time will tell when we get to the grand final which of these will be the winner. If even one of them will be the winner. That'll always be the thing. Is there anything more I want to talk about? I think those are like the main ones that I wanted to talk about. One thing I do want to highlight, if I can find it. I forgot to actually find it. I think it's over here. Yes, it is. Okay, so I wanted to highlight a bit from... I didn't fully 100% enjoy the Czech performance. I think one of the reasons being that the budget just wasn't there, and they are definitely some of those who feel a little lost on that stage. They've done a lot to try to not have that be the case, but the stage feels big and they get a little swallowed up with it when they don't have a lot of stuff going on, and the camera angles just maybe aren't tight enough, and also because it is difficult to do tight camera angles when you have such a big group that you want to show. But there is one part of the performance, however, that I do want to highlight, because I think it's a perfect use of the satellite stage, and I think it just looks really great. It's this part where they have that whole thing spinning around and you have the lights around it. I love this bit. This was one of my favorite shots of yesterday, and it really just makes me feel like that the satellite stage, the little bit there in the middle, I love that so many artists are using it. I love that there are bands who are doing their whole performance out there. I think this is the star of the stage, along with the movable LEDs that can do a lot, and we'll see a lot more of that in semifinal 2, which I'm excited to be looking at tomorrow, of course. But I think that satellite stage, the things you could do when you're out there in the crowd and you have the lights going around it, it's smaller so it becomes more intimate. I think that's the star of the stage design this year. And that shot, I just wanted to highlight that because I haven't seen anyone else talk about it. And I really love that. So what do we think? Those are the thoughts that I had on semi-final 1. All in all, a great show. Some songs that I would have liked to qualify, of course, but I think a lot of the things that I'm more excited to see, I'm one of the weird ones here. Call me weird, you can do that. But I think a lot of what I'm excited about, I have my favorite Austria going on in the next semi-final. I have my own country, of course, performing in the next semi-final. There's just a lot that I'm very excited to talk about in the next semi-final, so that'll be a lot more fun. I don't know if it'll be a lot more fun, but I think it'll be very fun as well. I'm running out of words to say here. All in all, great production. I'm just looking forward to seeing what they have in store for us on Thursday. But that's what I think. What do you think? Did your favorite qualify? What was some of the standout moments for you? As always, I would love to know down in the comments below. This is definitely looking out to be a fantastic Eurovision season, and I can't wait to see what we have next on the second semi-final. I'm just rambling now. I don't know why that's necessary. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, remember to leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe down below to the Neon Pavilion if you haven't already. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you guys for the next reaction. I'll be doing a reaction on Friday where we're going to be talking about semi-final 2 and some of the predictions that I have for the grand final. See you there.